Hi there, I'm Keeva Stratton and welcome to Culture Snap. Today's guest has been at the forefront of every major tech wave, from digital transformation to Web3, the Internet of Things, and even giving Alexa her iconic voices as a pioneer in conversational AI. Think SpongeBob, Westworld, and some of HBO's finest. Zach Johnson has shaped smart cities, blurred the lines between advanced AI and robotics, and put humans at the centre of it all. Now, Zach is bringing his world-class tech expertise to a much more analogue solution with his latest venture, Fogbell, a consultancy helping small and medium businesses cut through the tech fog confusion and chart a smarter path to growth. Get ready for a chat at the crossroads of cutting-edge innovation and real-world impact. I hope you enjoy. So, starting with perhaps a bit of a layman's understanding, explain to me a little bit of some of the subject matter expertise you've had across your career, because I know that you've worked in various areas of technology and innovation, but now obviously in AI. So just for a bit of background, tell me a little bit about some of those earlier disciplines.
Yeah, so I started out actually as a data analyst and policy analyst in the US, working on public policy program evaluations, mostly for the Department of Housing and Community Development, but also doing some stuff with the Department of Public Health and Education. And luckily for me, I guess, it coincided with the first dot-com boom. So even though I was initially kind of brought on and trained as a researcher and as an analyst, I had programming skills, which I didn't go to school for. I didn't actually take a single maths class in university, didn't really use computers other than for producing work. And I found myself with some in-demand skills at a time where people were hiring like crazy. And so I kind of fell into early days of the internet and was fortunate enough to work on some really interesting projects with some big customers who were doing really kind of innovative things like Chase Manhattan Bank, Citibank in Japan. I was actually involved in the first mobile banking application, which was a cool project. I was involved in creating the first company-wide intranet for Mercedes-Benz when they briefly merged with Chrysler. So, got a taste early on of like what innovation looked and felt like at a global scale. Incidentally, while I was doing this, I was also being moved around to different places in different countries. So initially started in Boston, got moved to Hamburg, Germany, then got moved to London, then got moved to Brisbane, Australia. And you're really fortunate to get that kind of both holistic technological education, but also holistic kind of cultural exposure as well, which is great. And then specific to AI, right around the time I met you, in fact, about 10 years ago, I started what I call the conversation design studio. As far as I'm aware, we were the first kind of pure play company to refer to what we did as conversation design exclusively. And through that and my relationships with Amazon and Google that I was able to cultivate, was able to get introduced to some really big customers in a few different industries, doing a lot of work in entertainment primarily. So got to work with like HBO and Nickelodeon and MTV and Sesame Street and just doing really, really cool stuff using conversational AI, which at the time was kind of the precursor to what we know now as LLMs and generative AI.
So tell me a little bit about conversational AI. What do we mean by that? Are we talking about voice? Are we talking, something? How do we use that in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, so it's been around for a long time. So if you recall the early and even current frustrations with like voice menus and customer service phone trees when you call Telstra or whoever, back in the day, those phone trees would be programmed. Like every single pathway would be predetermined. Every single word that you heard back in response to your queries was pre-programmed. And when I started to do conversational design work, it was a combination of that kind of pre-programmed, but then with a layer of machine learning. So you would pre-program what those trees are likely to be, what the optimal way that the user would experience the application. But then you could use machine learning to help kind of guide the user back to where they were going or to create a more expansive and deeper experience with even some of the words that you presented to them.
So a lot of the AI that you've been working on obviously has that human element. You know, we think about conversations and it has to be responsive in a way that's natural. I know you worked on a large scale project here in Australia with the City of the Sunshine Coast, and it was about creating Australia's first smart city. Has how humans interact with technology always been something that fascinates you or you're drawn to?
Yeah. So when I went to university, I studied literature and design and philosophy. So, a really kind of humanistic, liberal arts, broad based education. When I started my career, I was focused on public policy. So, how policies enacted would actually have an effect and an impact on people. And then when I got into technology, my focus was always on the end user. So in the early days of like user experience, back then it was called information architecture. It was really how can you put the user first and create an experience that's going to both meet their expectations of what that experience should be, but also help deliver the outcome of whatever application they're interacting with is intended to deliver. And so when I approach conversation design in the early days, it was really how do you use that natural language interface of conversation, which is kind of fundamentally and inherently human, to create a deeper connection with the brand or with the IP or the application or whatever it is. So yeah, that's been a consistent theme throughout my career.
It seems like an area that I guess is one that is very exciting, but also one that's generating a lot of fear when we think about society more broadly. How do you grapple with that? Where do you see this kind of explosion of AI going? Is it something that you're worried about, or is it something that you see as, exciting?
Well, both. So I think it's exciting because it is a fundamental shift in how we interact with technology. And because it's a fundamental shift, there's going to be more and more technological presence in our lives, particularly beyond the devices. So when you're holding a device, you know that you're interacting with technology because there's hardware in between you and the back end of that application. And so, there's an automatic kind of implied disconnect between the technology and you because it's that layer of hardware in between you and the thing that let's just call it an AI. And I think where we're heading, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, is that really, really smart technology is increasingly going to expand beyond the screen. And what I mean by that is we're going to be feeling it more embedded in our daily lives through embodied technology, but also just kind of atmospheric technology. So, smart homes have been around for 10, 15 years. Smart assistants have been in our homes for the same amount of time, but we know that it's a smart device that we're interacting with. We know kind of generally what the limitations are of those things because they have very specific jobs to do. It's, playing some music or turning on the lights or setting a timer or whatever it is. As AI continues to expand beyond the screen and continues to get more intelligent, it's going to show up in our lives in a whole bunch of different ways. And I feel like that's the part where we need to address the design challenges, including trust and, just the way that we interact. So this kind of new mode of human computer interaction is something that we're only starting to come to terms with what that actually means. And there's not many places where we can start seeing it in real life today, other than like a factory floor where you've got human workers and robot workers in doing the same job in the same space at the same time. And even in those contexts, those robots that the humans are working with historically have done just one thing really good. So it might just be a single arm that picks up something and moves it to another place. And now we're starting to see humanoid robots that are multifunctional, completely articulate, mirrors of the capabilities of what a physical human being can do being put in those same places alongside humans. And we haven't figured out the design parameters to account for all the different variables and permutations of what could happen. So we're testing these things out in real time. And there's some actual inherent danger in doing that beyond just the kind of the trust and privacy and all the other things that are kind of wrapped up in the policy discussions around AI.
And when we talk about design, who is designing this? Like, this is, I think, one of the interesting questions. We're seeing technology fed to us, but there isn't really an awareness of who's the author of, when we talk about machine learning, what is the machine learning from? Who's feeding it the content for it to learn? What's the ethics of that? I'm kind of interested in kind of, lifting the veil on a bit of that as someone who's a lot more familiar with it.
There's some inherent challenges in the way that we're approaching AI right now, in that, in many respects, particularly when it comes to the large language models, we're developing technology that is removed from an end user application. So we're making the AI smarter because we can, but we don't know why or for what purpose. There are very compelling use cases that have been identified and used to train very specific instances of AI to do like incredible things that are going to improve our health and well-being and solve a lot of really complex challenges that we might never have been able to solve on our own. But those are being basically those are being engineered. They're not being designed. They're being trained by an engineering team that is collecting data and feeding that data into the model and then doing iterations on seeing how well it interprets that data, etc. And then it's being surfaced to end users to figure out what to do with it. And I feel like, I already mentioned my early days in the internet. Back then it was called information architecture. It then kind of evolved into user experience. And user experience has been like de rigueur for, almost 20 years now. So you've got user experience designers who are really, really good at helping people interact with digital interfaces. And then in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been like this service design discipline, which is like an extension of user experience. And it really looks at a much more holistic journey of the user, the customer, citizen, or whatever, across multiple different digital interfaces or, technological backends, and creating kind of what that roadmap looks like. And now we're seeing like this agentic design, which is taking like a combination of user experience and service design and incorporating, okay, well now, instead of like endpoint technologies being able to handle a specific interaction between a user and a technology, now we're going to have an AI agent do multiple steps of that process and then kind of come back to you with a whole bunch of things already taken care of. So I feel like there's a new discipline that's emerging. I don't know what it's called yet, but it's not just an evolution of UX service design, agentic design. It's actually a combination of all of those things. And it's a skill set that actually it's not that common to find people who have all three of those capabilities. And that's why I'm doing a lot of like thinking and writing about, and specifically referring to like physical AI, because it's beyond designing for digital. It's designing for our future reality where AI is literally everywhere.
Yeah, it's incredible to think, and I often think of, the motor car, the invention of the motor car as kind of this thing that just didn't just change transportation. Obviously, all of those people that relied on horses as industries had to evolve, and our cities and our social fabric of society changed just through this one technology. So this single invention of the motor car completely shifts where we live, how we work, the different industries. But what we're seeing with AI is like a multitude of shifts that are seismic, all happening at the same time. And I think it's a really interesting time, I don't know, sociopolitically as well, where we're really grappling to kind of have a consensus of the social contract, let alone having this fabric kind of torn up. Is this the kind of stuff that you ponder often, or where do you, I don't know, I sit with this stuff and I'm not on the inside, so I kind of go, I just hope there's someone with great ethics figuring this out.
Yeah, there's those kind of fundamental kind of industrial age technologies really changed the way that we did things very quickly. And I don't think that AI is doing the same thing in the same way. Obviously, it's transforming society, but it's doing it differently. With the advent of the car, the printing press, cotton gin, all of these things, it actually changed the way we worked. It fundamentally allowed us to do something completely different. the current crop of AI technologies is just letting us do the stuff that we already do faster. And maybe faster and better, mostly faster and worse, particularly if you're looking at like, oh, I can create like 20 social media posts in an hour now instead of like one in a day. All 20 of those social media posts are going to be crap if you're using AI to do it. But if you thoughtfully and deliberately incorporate the right AI tools into your existing workflow, you can get that existing workflow done better, faster, cheaper, which is great. So I think that fact that it's letting you do the same thing better, faster, cheaper, that's what's going to have the big kind of most immediate knock-on effect in our society, because that's when we're going to start to see job losses and massive scale automation and all of that stuff, which then introduces what I was referring to before around the physical AI. So to answer your question, yes, I think about this a lot, which then you start thinking about, okay, now the physical AI manifestation goes back to what is the new car? What is the new printing press? What is the new cotton gin? Like all of that stuff is yet to come. And that's the stuff that's both kind of like anxiety producing and exciting, depending on like where you are in the industry and where you fall on the spectrum of people who are creating those things to people who are going to be, on whom those things will be imposed.
Mm. I think I think the physical AI stuff is probably the most fascinating. That's where I do want to dive deepest today. I mean, I always think about like, what do I want AI to do in my world? And obviously I'd love a robot that cleaned my house fully and, a robot that did a blow dry for me regularly and those kinds of things that you're paying human labor for at the moment that have become very expensive, in terms of certainly here in Australia, those kinds of human labor services are incredibly expensive. But then the flip side of that is, where do all those humans then go in terms of their work and getting jobs? So this is something I wrestle with as someone who's probably in a position, I've just purchased the latest robot vacuum cleaner and I love it. It mops.
It probably still gets stuck from time to time.
Yeah, a little, but nothing compared to generations ago. Like this is the 90% now. I feel like we're at the 90% as opposed to the 10% effectiveness. So yeah, this is something as someone in a position to buy these technologies and engage with them, I do wonder, well, who am I taking a job from by doing that? And how do we then reorder society, particularly at a time when politically, I don't think there's a lot of trust. I don't think people want their politicians to be deciding, what is a good and fair society. So that's something I'm kind of wrestling with.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer or frankly, even real deep thoughts about it, because it's just, first of all, it's not my area of expertise, despite having kind of a public policy background early in my career. But secondly, it's such a difficult and, from my perspective, maybe even currently an intractable problem that I don't see a solution. And so I feel like it's something that's going to be worked out in various ways across different countries. And maybe some of them will get it right. And maybe some of them will get it very, very wrong. But I think we're going to have to start seeing what those good models and bad models look like to then emulate the good ones and hopefully stay away from the bad ones. And obviously the bad ones are going to affect a lot of people. So like I said, it feels like an intractable problem. I do think we're probably decades away from the, where it's affecting people on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we're already seeing people losing jobs to AI now, but at the scale where it's possible, I think that that's still like 10, 20 years away.
And of course, there's lots of industries that are growing based on AI as well. So that's the flip side. And I think it is, for me, it's just that wrestle between the knowledge economy and those that can participate in that versus those that have more of a physical labor type of work. So yeah, they're the kind of things that I wrestle with quite a bit. But I'm also quite excited. I think that there's a lot to this technology as someone who does engage with it quite a lot and really enjoys and certainly has in my own business world utilized, as you say, to make things more efficient. I do worry about LinkedIn. I feel like we're all now just having conversations with AI.
I completely agree. I'm not on any social media except for LinkedIn. And I've been really surprised and dismayed at how fast LinkedIn has devolved into really the only reason I use it at this point in my life is because I've lived in so many different places and worked with so many different people around the world that that's just the easiest way to just like keep in touch with them, keep track of like what people are doing. Somebody who I haven't worked with pops up, I haven't heard from them in 20 years and I see they've got a new job and it gives me an opportunity to like reconnect with them. So from that standpoint, it's great. But in terms of like learning anything, I haven't learned anything from LinkedIn in like at least months, probably longer.
Yeah. It's quite depressing, actually, because it's just to troll through all the trash now to actually get to those updates and to get to, people who are meaningfully doing great stuff. I think it gets lost in the AI explosion, which sadly I think is just probably because people like myself sold content so well 15 years ago that people have now gone, actually, I can make this content myself and probably don't have the ability to tell what's good or what's meaningful versus, what's being kind of produced. So, Zach, I hear that you've got a new consultancy that you've been building. Tell me, what is it and why did you get it started?
Thank you for asking. So I've just launched a consultancy called Fogbell, which was founded on the premise that everything that I read through my own kind of echo chamber, my news feed, social media, everything, all of the AI conversation is really interesting to me, but it's confounding to a lot of people who aren't like mired in that on a day-to-day basis. In particular, business leaders who are facing a number of different challenges, and all they're hearing is that AI is going to solve everything for them, and that's just not true. So Fogbell is a service that provides kind of strategic navigation to leaders who want to clear the tech fog away, figure out what the foundational struggles that dealing with are that are non-technical potentially, and then address those first, where you can then potentially build technology solutions, including AI on top of that, to help accelerate and augment the work that you're already doing, not just automate and replace the work that you think is not right. So yeah, I didn't see a lot of other people talking about like solving these really kind of deep-rooted challenges and kind of addressing this organizational debt, which is what Gartner's now calling it. And I think it's really important. And I think that I have some experience gained over a couple of decades across various different sizes of businesses and industries, as well as actually being an AI expert where I can help kind of steer leaders in the right direction, help them create a foundation upon which they can then introduce technology and AI that's actually going to help them achieve their objectives and reach their goals and as a business.
I think we're seeing a lot of the discussion right now is, what AI should we embrace? What AI should our company have? But what you're kind of saying is, pump the brakes for a second. And before you even make the selection of AI, there's probably a few things that need to be looked at first. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, there's probably some quick wins that you can do in parallel. You can introduce some like process enhancements to your existing work streams that are already working well, where you've got teams in place that might be able to free them up to do other higher level things, while at the same time, you as a leader are addressing some of the kind of foundational business challenges that will then allow you to create bigger gains by potentially introducing new technology going forward. So I'm not saying don't implement any AI right now. I'm saying there's potentially quick wins, but if you're really going to look for a massive movement in how your business operates and what your success looks like, AI is not the solution that's going to like change things overnight. So let's be more deliberate about how you think about implementing technology and what AI is actually going to do for you.
And you were telling us earlier about your various kind of chapters of your career and how you've essentially, kind of fallen into technology, but you've now found yourself at the absolute crest of each of these waves and becoming the advisor. Is there a point where, you feel that companies are just going to get swept over by technology? Is this something that's important for technologies to kind of pause and really think about?
I mean, it's happened repeatedly over the last main waves of technology evolution, innovation, whether it's the dot-com boom where everybody just figured they had to have an online presence and do e-commerce overnight, with the mobile world where everybody had to have an app for everything, with Web3 where everybody had to be in the metaverse, now with AI, with everybody having to implement AI to automate everything that they do. That's all a fundamentally flawed premise. And so, yes, the need to just pause and reflect a little bit, and maybe reflect with somebody who has been through all of those cycles and work with businesses to kind of make some mistakes and get through to the other side successfully is the way that you're going to make the right decisions about implementing the right technology.
Fantastic. And if you want to learn more about Fogbell, where will you find it, Zach?
Hopefully very simple, fogbell.co.
But I want to talk more about what you're doing now, Zach, in terms of AI around us. Tell us a little bit about that business.
So I decided that I wanted to, as with the conversation design stuff a decade ago, I knew that was something, well, I had a gut feel that was going to be something that everybody, every business, every brand was going to want to avail themselves of. And for 5, 6, 7 years, I was actually right. And then people kind of got disillusioned with it because the technology wasn't advancing. It was really fairly, it kind of plateaued in terms of what you could do with those digital assistants, voice agents, etc. And then there was a period of time where I was starting to focus on, okay, well, what is the next thing? And I was looking back through my archives and actually wrote a paper in 2019 on how generative AI, and this was before LLMs, how we could create these generative AI models that would kind of evolve and enhance what you could do on top of an Alexa or a Google Assistant. And so started thinking about generative AI, and then real generative AI came into being with ChatGPT and DALL-E and all of that. And it very quickly became super, super saturated without a real compelling use case other than the small language models or, the industry specific models that were being developed by DeepMind or IBM or whatever. And at the same time, I was starting to see more and more interest in bringing large language models into training of a variety of different types of robots. So whether it was manufacturing robots or healthcare robots or, home aid robots or whatever, or autonomous vehicles of various descriptions. And that made me think, okay, as you mentioned earlier, people aren't designing for the humans in that context. They're taking really, really smart software that, the LLMs are enabling and combining that with really advanced and rapidly evolving hardware. And they're putting those two things together and then just figuring out how people are going to interact with it. And I don't think that's the way to go. And as much as LinkedIn is become cluttered and noisy, there are still people, as you say, writing about some compelling things. However, I haven't really found people writing about this intersection of advanced AI, advanced hardware in the form of non-digital stuff, non-screen based applications, and human-centered design. There's a lot of people writing very, very intelligently and articulately and eloquently about each of those three things. I really haven't found anybody writing about the combination of those three things. And so I was like, okay, I think there's an opportunity here. And especially when you hear Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, saying, physical AI is the future, and them, NVIDIA betting a whole bunch of money on creating digital twins so you could train these new physical AI devices, machines, beings, whatever, in a hyper realistic 3D simulated environment so that you could remove a lot of the variables, but you're still going to have the human element once the simulation training is complete and it gets put into the real world. They call this a sim to real gap. And I feel like no matter how much compute resources, no matter how much advanced 3D visualizations, there's still going to be that sim to real gap when humans, especially at scale, start interacting with this stuff. So I felt like my background, my trajectory, the kind of stuff that I've worked on gave me some insight, gave me, you know, a voice that I could use to start at least initiating a conversation. I have been surprised since I started writing kind of exclusively about physical AI. My engagement on LinkedIn has dropped down dramatically, and I think it's because like I'm trying to address three different audiences with one topic, and I'm kind of the UX folks don't really get the hardware side of or like the robotic side of things. The roboticists definitely don't get the human centered design sort of side of things. So I feel like there's an opportunity to start the conversation, but frankly, I am like struggling with whom that conversation should be started. And so anybody that's listening to this podcast is interested in that, love to continue that discussion.
I do wonder if LinkedIn is going through a disengagement
Yeah.
generally. I wonder if just the enormous influx of content now from AI produced content is switching a lot of people off, and therefore they're not using LinkedIn in the same way that they were perhaps previously. But also it's so much harder to fight the algorithm when you're, in a highly kind of populated space. So I think there is that kind of context going on. But I want to talk more about human-centered design and break that down a little bit, because we do want to make this very accessible for people. So when you're talking human-centered design, this is really about thinking through the lens of how people use it, how it would show up for in everyday life, the practical experience of it. Break that down for me.
I think it's more than that. It's basically the precursor to everything that you just said. And it's fundamentally about what does somebody want to accomplish? What is it that they need to do that this thing can actually help them do and help them do better than anything else? So it's first and foremost like figuring out why you're building the thing, specifically for whom, and specifically how they're going to use that thing to do what they need to do. And then you layer on those other things that you said. You kind of map out the user journey. You define what the user interface elements are. You kind of define what all the touch points are and kind of close the loop for the experience. So I feel like there's a lot of focus on, you know, the UI UX of things, but the philosophy behind that I feel has gotten a little bit lost.
And so when we think about humans, though, there's an incredible diversity of ways that people might want to use something, or how it might solve for. And I think if we look at probably the early physical AI products, they are very mass when they're looking at their targets, right? So they do seem to be things like I mentioned earlier, a robotic, vacuum cleaner is something that most households need to vacuum. This is not something that is, we can specifically say, well, that's 29 to 34-year-old females in San Diego, so how do you bring that sense of diversity and difference into that thinking?
So one of the early areas of focus and expertise that I developed in the dot-com boom was bringing information together to serve disparate stakeholders within an individual workforce. So I mentioned Daimler Chrysler, 300,000 employees. The team that I led was responsible for identifying all the information within the organization that somebody needed to get their job done, and then surfacing that information specifically to them in a way that made sense to them, basically as their desktop. So, and the terminology is outdated because we're kind of beyond the desktop a little bit in some respect, but the goal was when I show up in the morning, if I'm building a car or if I'm running the business, doesn't matter. I'm going to have the information I need to do my job front and center right there in a way that made sense to me. And if it didn't exactly make sense to me, I could personalize it a little bit more so that it was not just the information that I needed, but it was also kind of where I wanted to see it so I could like prioritize the stuff that was going to catch my eye first. So it was this like multi-layered personalization. Granted, it was for a relatively homogeneous population of people who are working for an automobile manufacturer. But, you're talking, blue collar engineer, mechanics right on up to white collar executives of multiple genders, multiple races, multiple creeds, etc. So there was some inherent diversity in how we approach that. But as AI continues its like global expansion, I think there are different philosophies for how this is going to be achieved. And there are a couple of different approaches that we're seeing like rise in prominence in people who are kind of being most vocal about it. So like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, just like in the last several days, has published this manifesto on what the future of computing is going to be like. And in his vision, everybody's going to have a personal AI that knows them, that knows who they are, knows what they like, knows what they want to do, and they can access the whole kind of ecosystem of AI agents, internet, whatever it is, to help that person do what they want to do. And the interface to that agent might be through their glasses, it might be through VR, AR, desktop, mobile, whatever it is. So that's one side of things. And then obviously there's the cynical view of that is, well, yes, that personal agent is going to help them collect more data on that person, which they can then monetize. And it's also going to help them sell more stuff, whether it's glasses or VR headsets or whatever. And then another view is someone like Dario Amodei from Anthropic, who wants to create that personalized relationship with AI through a combination of your like historical interactions with it, your specific instructions to it, your affordance of what it can and cannot know about you, and it's your affordance of what it can and cannot learn about you through those interactions. So it becomes personalized, but personalized within some parameters that you set, which I think is compelling. But because, Claude still just lives on a browser, you're still limited with how you're going to interact with that thing. So it's not quite as expansive or as holistic as like the MetaVision. But I think that there's kind of two separate sides of like, the AI spectrum of like, we want to know everything about you and give you everything, to we want to basically create a relationship with you on your terms. And based on those terms, we will become a trusted advisor and a trusted educator, influencer, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and it's something that I think often about. I was at a conference and a technologist painted this picture of just a simple difference of getting into an Uber in the future, and the Uber knows you so well that it knows to, set the temperature at a particular temperature because you like to run hot or cold, or, the music is played that's to your taste. And so, when we think about things like filter bubbles that we've seen in the past, 15 years around news and content and just being fed this world that, reinforces our own worldview and makes us very kind of myopic in terms of, what we understand of the world. I wonder, like, a world without physical resilience? Like, is that the world we're moving into where, maybe I'm starting to sound like my grandparents here, but it just sounds so comfortable, right? To not even ever have to get into a car and, it's never to a temperature that doesn't upset you. It's like, what happens to
Yeah,
humans?
maybe a little friction is good. Like, one of the things that's defined humanity throughout our existence has been, being put into, really difficult and adversarial positions from which we like evolve and adapt and overcome. And to your point, if we become like so comfortable, then what's the evolution point? What's the incentive to evolve beyond that? But I just wanted to touch because the example you just gave, I think, was very illustrative of those two kind of different mindsets of how AI might serve you in the future. So in like the meta version of that example that you gave, they're going to infer all of those preferences of what you want in the Uber based on all of your behavior and all of the interactions across all of their properties. Whereas the other version, whether it's Anthropic's or somebody else's, you're going to tell it those things in advance. And then it's going to use that stuff as part of its kind of information gathering about what it should be doing and how it should be serving you. And I've been talking to some guys, some people, some of whom work at Qualcomm, some work at other like scientific organizations. And they've got this little side project where they're thinking about what a digital twin in the future looks like, and not a digital twin as NVIDIA defines it, which is like, 3D replica of a warehouse or a city or whatever it is. This is, how do I represent myself in the ether when AI is kind of ever present? And how do I control what it knows about me? And how do I kind of stage gate, increase personalization in some contexts and increase privacy in other contexts? And so I've had a couple of conversations with a group of these people who are talking about, like, well, what are those various contexts? What are those various ways that, let's say you've got, like, let's just sake of argument, you've got like a USB key that's equivalent to like a crypto drive that only you have access to. Maybe it's a physical key, maybe it's a digital key, whatever it is, but only you have access to that, whether, through biometrics or something else. And that thing is what contains all of the most private elements of you. And you can decide which of those things you want to offer up. Everything else is essentially public. And so I think that's one way that you could take a step towards having a little bit more control and agency. And maybe some people will opt for more friction. Maybe some people will opt for less friction. And hopefully on aggregate as a society, where we've got enough friction going on so that we are still being put into scenarios where we actually have to adapt and overcome and evolve.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I saw an ad campaign recently, and it had Chat GPT can't put sand between your toes, and Chat GPT, like the human experience, right? You can't. There's just going to be some things that AI can never replicate, and I think I can see a future where there will be a growing portion of society that chooses to opt out of technology.
I agree. I do think that there's a conversation that needs to be had about relinquishing privacy with transparency. So I feel like, you and I have a sufficient level of sophistication to, and acumen around technology specifically, not in general, but like sophistication, acumen around technology to say, worst case scenario, there might be a breach and they will let me know and I will change my password and I'll put whatever other measures in place to protect myself. So you're making that choice knowing what kind of, the scenarios are, knowing what you're giving up and knowing what you're getting in exchange for it. I feel like there's been a lot of work done by like certain individuals who are really like trying to elevate this notion of like informed consent into the public conversation. And I feel like it's going to be even more and more important as people start using these AIs for everything and relying on it for everything. And if the AI then asks you for something, you've kind of established this implicit trust already, or it's established this trust with you. So you're going to be more likely to offer up a piece of information that you might be more reticent if, like, you've been served a form on a website and you'd be like, wait a second, I don't want to do that. Versus you're having a conversation with a personality that you have an ongoing dialogue with, and it's like, oh, what's your mother's maiden name? Oh, of course, yeah, this is what it is, right? So I feel like there's more and more need to have this dialogue and policy around this kind of informed consent and transparency of use so that people can make the right decisions for themselves. I don't think there's a blanket policy. I think some people are not going to want to use any technology. Some people are going to be very judicious about it. I, for example, like, obviously I use AI extensively throughout the day in my professional life, a little bit in my personal life, mostly to like learn stuff. So I don't use Google for searching at all anymore. I use like Perplexity. If I want to do like some really extensive something, I'll use like Gemini Deep Research. But by and large, I try to deliberately, and this goes back to like the friction thing, I try to still maintain relationships with a lot of like analog stuff, right? So I've got the digital pen, but I prefer the ink pen. I prefer pen and paper. I've got an analog watch. I listen to vinyl on a turntable. Like, I cook with my hands and pots and pans. And like, as you know, I do pottery, and you know the appeal to that. You're like, actually, like, the tactile experience of touching something and feeling something and being able to mold something from a lump of nothing into something beautiful. and the satisfaction that that represents. I don't think we experience the same thing when it's only in the digital realm. So as much as I'm excited about it, as much as I use it and I'm a proponent of it, I do think it's also important to retain those things that kind of really make us human and that have helped us get to the point in our evolution that we're currently at, and then hopefully beyond.
Absolutely. So you talked about AI around us as kind of combining those three areas in a way that, you're yet to find the audience, but I know it exists. And I'm sure that as people become more aware of the why, that's going to certainly elevate. If you were to design a team today, Zach, in terms of not people, but in terms of the disciplines that you would want to see on a team, building, any kind of piece of technology, what would they represent?
So my current project that I'm working on right now is with the University of California, San Diego. And it's a fairly large project, but it's the summertime. And so we're kind of dealing with a skeleton crew. And first of all, so like my core team is myself, Claude, Gemini, and Canva. And then adding to that, I've got a third year undergrad student who is majoring in mathematics and interaction design, a second year undergraduate student who is also majoring in computer science and design, a recent graduate who's on her way to do a master's at Carnegie Mellon University in human computer interaction design, and then a data scientist who works for the San Diego Supercomputer Center. So between the skill set that I have myself, that my core team of these various AI tools, and these young, very, very smart, multidisciplinary, like almost polymathic kids are bringing to the table, I didn't know it, but that's kind of my ideal team right now.
And I think this is the era of the polymath. I think people aren't talking about that enough. It's one thing historically to have like a core discipline, but I think that we've come to realize that that is not going to be enough going forward. You have to be able to think far more laterally than purely your financial vertical or your tech vertical or whatever it might be. It's an interesting mix, and I think, Zach, just for our listeners' benefit, you yourself have quite a marketing understanding, right? You've always been someone with a really strong area and appeal for that, because I do think that that is something that needs to come through into teams, not necessarily marketing as a discipline, but how you engage with audience. How do you make this thing relevant, translatable, something that my mother could effectively understand, in terms of the tech. Otherwise, great ideas will sit on shelves, right? If no one can understand how it's going to enhance their life. Do you think boards need different specializations going forward as well? Like, what would you think would be one of the critical skill sets that you might not see on boards today that you'd like to see perhaps more frequently going forward?
I mean, this is not a new problem. This goes back, decades, if not since companies were started. I don't think that there are human-centered design professionals represented on boards at all. And there was a time, maybe 15 years ago, where design thinking was a craze. And all of a sudden, like big corporations, small corporations, startup, like everybody was like, oh, we're doing design thinking. And it was great. And like it made like IDEO a ton of money. I do think that it's enabled a conversation about the importance of design, but ultimately what happened was that we weren't as an industry able to adequately align design and strategy. And I think this is something that you do particularly well. And I think that it doesn't require a new discipline or mindset. I basically think it involves a new definition of design and strategy essentially being synonymous. Design is strategy, strategy is design. And so I think whether you're a finance professional or a legal professional or whatever, I think understanding that what you're doing on a board is setting a strategy for the executive team to implement and execute. But that strategy is designed in like the capital D sense, not in like the little d, we're going to make our presentation decks pretty. I mean, we're going to create something that is fundamentally building this entity deliberately with our customers as the humans at the center of things, because no company has generated any value without a human being recognizing that value and transacting some kind of currency to receive that value. So I think that having that conversation with the board about design being strategy and strategy being design is important. I think it does need to be driven from like the chairperson. Maybe that's like an Australian Institute of Company Directors addition to the curriculum or certification. I don't know, but first of all, I think boards generally need to be more kind of representative and diverse. But within that, I do think there needs to be an acknowledgement of strategy is essentially design. And so design shouldn't be like frowned upon or pushed aside. And by the time it gets down to the little d design activities of actually implementing interfaces or brands or whatever it is, that's still part of the strategy. It's implementing and executing on the strategy. No different than writing the code or building the thing or shipping it or doing support or whatever it is.
I think it's such an important part of how we move to a positive future with technology. I think it does start in the boardroom. And I think that there is obviously a significant issue with diversity on boards as a starting point. And, we could talk all day about that. I think diversity should be a fundamental of every board. That should just be assumed. But I do think that the disciplines that boards look for now, when they're mapping out what they need on boards, I think it has to be quite different to even 10, 15 years ago.
I've got a quick anecdote if we've got time. So years and years ago, I think maybe 15 years ago, the Australian government, based on a pilot project that happened in New Zealand, created a project to bring design thinking into Australian businesses. So they basically had, design thinkers in residence. That wasn't their title, but they were business advisors who were designers and design thinking professionals. And Australian companies could apply for this grant to be put through this program. And so I was CEO of an Australian company at the time. We applied, we got accepted. I think we were maybe the second or third company in all of Australia that went through this program. The guy who was running that program, the company that he had consulted to right before mine was Blundstone in Tasmania. And this kind of predated Blundstone being like the footwear that everybody wears around the world, especially if you're, young and cool and going to Coachella or backpacking or whatever.
It wasn't cool for a while there, I remember.
That's right. The turning point, this is where I'm getting to with the anecdote, is this guy, Adam, after having run this program for Blundstone, a couple of years later, Blundstone came to him and said, "Hey, we want to hire you as our head of design." He then went in and kind of basically created this heritage brand, made it cool, created collaborations, all that stuff. Next thing you know, he gets promoted to being the CEO. He's still the CEO of Blundstone. And there was a direct line. He was a designer, and direct line from like bringing design thinking to the boardroom to then actually bringing design thinking to the executive team on a permanent basis and executing design as strategy and strategy as design.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it is just such a good example of where the world needs to go, because I always see technology as an enabler, and technology is something that we bring into business. It's not something that necessarily becomes the business unless you are purely tech business. And I think to do that successfully and effectively and ethically, it does start with design thinking. So I think if there's one message, and Zach, I just want to thank you for being on Culture Snap today, because you've brought so much depth of understanding to, not just the technical side, but the human side of what's happening with AI. But I think if there's one message I'd love to leave organizations with is the value of design thinking that's the key to being future-proof, really.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate the invitation, Keeva.
And if people do want to read your articles, Zach, where are they going to find them?
AI Around Us at Substack. So aiaroundus.substack.com.
Awesome. And I'll put that up in the link. Thank you, Zach.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.